I am your host, Ron Strand. We are glad that you're joining us tonight, and we've got a great show planned for you tonight. I've been looking forward to this for quite a while. And next week, I'll be interviewing former Governor Mike Huckabee right here on the Upper Room Presents. And so right now with Benny Hester tonight and Governor Mike Huckabee, two of my favorite people. I'm really looking forward to these. Not that I haven't looked forward to the other ones, but I'm particularly looking forward to these two. If you're joining us for the first time tonight, welcome. We are glad that you're here. And if you haven't liked us, like us or on Facebook, or I guess it's follow us, right, Marisa? Follow us on Facebook. And you could also subscribe to our YouTube channel. And both of those are at The Upper Room Presents. The Upper Room Presents. We'd love to have you follow us. You'll be notified of our upcoming shows. We've got some great things in the works. And also, if you haven't checked out our website, check out theupperroompresents.com. And you'll see I try not to do too many upcoming things here because these go into archive and it becomes kind of old news. But we do have a great show coming up April 22nd, 2022. Another comedy show at the Upper Room. So go there, find out about it, and register for the event. I'm going to read you something that I got actually off of Wikipedia, which is not something I typically do, but I just think this really summarizes my guest for this evening. So bear with me as I read this. Benny Hester's recording of his song When God Ran touched the consciousness of Christians worldwide and is one of the longest running #1 songs in contemporary Christian music history. #1 for 13 weeks and the #3 song in the 60-year history of word record. When God Ran, the song, continues to be recorded by artists in many languages and musical genres, including adult contemporary, pop, rock, R&B, alternative, and Southern gospel, making it to the top of the charts repeatedly. The title track from his third album, Nobody Knows Me Like You, reached #1 on Christian music charts and became the first contemporary Christian music song to break the Billboard Top 50 Adult Contemporary chart, debuting at number 44 on November 7th, 1981. Hester's first contemporary Christian music single, Jesus Came Into My Life, and Be a Receiver were breakthrough recordings for radio, blurring the lines between pop rock and inspirational music and becoming the first contemporary pop rock song to be universally accepted and widely played across radio formats. I'm going to read just a little bit more. His 1978 self-titled debut album, Benny Hester, released in 1982 as Be a Receiver, influenced the burgeoning Christian music scene and ranks among the first contemporary Christian music albums as the musical landscape shifted with the end of the Jesus music era and the birth of the industry known as contemporary Christian music. His song Secret Thoughts made it to #1 on the rock charts, and Hester had three simultaneously chart toppers, a feat which has never been achieved up to that point in Christian music. Benny and his now wife, Rita, produced the groundbreaking tween music-driven sketch comedy and dance television series Roundhouse on Nickelodeon, and he has written and recorded more than 25 #1 top songs. That's quite a bit. I usually don't read that much, but I think it gives us a great insight into who this man is. And he's been of influence in my life in terms of music and my early Christian experience. I came to Christ as a young man in 1976. Benny's music was just kind of coming onto the scene at that time. It's Christian music. But we're going to go all over the place with him tonight. Would you please welcome to Real Talk, Benny Hester. Benny,
hey,
hi, how are you?
Hey, how are you? So good to be with you.
Thank you for being with us. I was telling the folks, I've been so looking forward to this because as I mentioned, your music has history in my journey of faith, and then you and I became acquainted with one another. Well, actually, I'm going to go back a little bit. When I was on staff at Calvary Chapel of Whittier,
Hmm.
back in the late '70s, as a young youth pastor, we had you come out and play a concert there, you and your band at the time. And it was right after the whole that first, and it wasn't the first album. I think it was your second album that came out. But
Hmm.
you don't remember me. I was just some punk kid then. But you and I got to know each other. I don't know. It's been probably 6 or 7 years ago now when we had you come out to the Upper Room. You put a wonderful band together. You came out and did a set, and then you came out and did another set for our New Year's Eve event, and a solo set. And you and I and Kathy and Rita have gotten together on an occasion, and just wonderful
Yep.
people. And so I'm glad you're here. All that to say that. Thank you
Well,
for
thank
being
you.
here.
Well, thank you for having me. All those things are true. We had such a great time with you many times.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, what I want to do tonight, Benny, is kind of go back into your journey and, go from early life, your musical influences, your life influences, and kind of begin there. And then just kind of and just follow the trail, because you've had so many life experiences. As I was preparing for
Hmm.
tonight, I mean, I always knew that you had a lot that you've accomplished in your life, not only as a musician, but as a television producer and even more.
Hmm.
But I want to give the folks a chance to kind of get to know the man behind the music, the man behind the television, the producer's chair, and so forth. But you came out of Waco, Texas. And I don't know what it is about the water in Waco, Texas, but a lot of things originated in Waco, didn't they?
They did. Yeah,
Yeah.
and like Word Records,
Yes. Yes.
at the time that I signed with them, they were the top record company. I used
Yep.
to see the word building; it had a big W on it, and
Yeah.
I thought Word meant something for the blind.
Oh,
You
did you
know,
really?
I did, and I thought, well, that's great. I'm so glad
Yeah.
they're here in Waco, and I guess it actually did have something to do with the blind, in the sense that people who are spiritually blind,
Wow, that's cool.
word had such a huge impact, and
Yeah.
on just millions of people. So it
Yeah.
was terrific that it started there.
Yes. Yes. Although what's interesting about that, though, is that by the time you came to faith was much later. You really weren't
Yeah.
in Waco at that time, were you?
Well, I was born and grew up in Waco,
Yeah.
and I had, when I signed my first CCM, or Christian music contract, that was really much later. That was in
Yeah.
1980. Well, I signed with Spirit for one album, and I did
Yeah.
that, and that was in 1978. That was released, and then in 1980, I signed with Word.
Yeah. Now, Spirit was Stan Moser, wasn't it? He started that
No,
label.
no. Spirit was Sparrow Records, Billy Ray
Oh.
Hearn.
Oh, yeah. Billy Ray
And
Hearn. Yes.
yeah, and Billy was sort of an offshoot. He was at Word for a long
Yeah.
time, and then started Sparrow and wanted to
Right.
do something a little new and in California,
Yeah.
and he did. He did a lot of really great things.
Yeah. So it's interesting because I think of Waco. It's kind of this little small enclave of a town out in the middle
Hmm.
of Texas, kind of mid Texas, isn't it? A little bit of the
Y-
south of mid Texas, and
yes, Central Texas, and that's what
yeah,
we call the heart of Texas. Is
the heart of Texas.
the way I always grew up, hearing it
Yeah,
referred to.
yeah, and so many
So,
things had come out of there.
well, for me, it was very strange because my mom took me to begin classical music lessons, and it was a European couple.
Yes,
They were just fantastic. They were very strict. And so from the time I was 4 years old, I studied classical music. And I mean, it was every day, every week, very strict. And when I got into high school, of course, I was in the band. I
yeah,
was the president of our high school band for a couple of years, and we just had a great time. But I met some guys who I happened to be looking at a bass guitar, and I had it in my house, and I had the lid open, and they had come by to pick up a microphone from my home,
yeah,
and they saw that bass, and they said, do you play that? And I said, yes. That was a big lie, because
Was it
I'd
really?
never even touched it. I'd never touched a bass guitar.
Really?
And they said, okay, grab it, come with us. Let's go. We're starting a band. Let's put this together, and you play bass. So we had a rehearsal. I faked my way through it. I did learn how to play bass real quickly because of my background. And so from that point on, I was in a pop band in high school, and it changed my focus. My interest became about pop culture
Yeah.
and what people my age were doing and thinking. And we played all the hits of the era. I wrote a few songs. I was a terrible writer then, but and we inserted them in our set. And
Yeah.
I'm sure the guys, they just played along with me, and it was really a lot of fun. But I was a bass player, and the Morticians went on for many years. In fact, they continued on. In fact, they're still actually playing. If you go to Waco, Texas,
Yes.
the Morticians are still a very big group, of course, with all different members. But
Yes.
we carried it on into college, and then one of my bandmates ended up heading up, some other people and putting them together. Just kept the whole thing going for all these years.
Yeah, I actually went to their website today because I'd read that they're still going, and they do.
Yep.
Yeah, and they're still going
Yep.
strong. The Morticians. So were you part of the making coming up with the name, the Morticians?
Well, we were without a name for a long
Yeah.
time,
Uh-huh.
and we went to this big battle of the bands, and I still have the trophy. It's about 4 feet tall, and we were about to go on stage. The guy asked us, "How do you want me to introduce you?" We all looked at each other. We had no idea. We didn't have a name, and so Joe, my friend in the band, the lead guitar player, had always played around with film, and they were always making these scary movies. And so I think it was one of a couple of guys said, well, let's call it the Morticians, because we can change it. We can change
Yeah.
that later. And
Right.
so the guy went out and said, and now the Morticians. And we walked out and we played, and we won the battle of the bands. It
No
was 2
kidding.
days. It was 2 days of continuous bands that played,
Wow.
and we won. And after that, there was no changing the name. There was
Yeah.
no doing it. So we made the best of it. Like,
Yeah.
our concerts would begin with we would carry out a coffin with our lead singer in it. And
Really?
we would start the Rolling Stones song, "This'll Be the Last Time," and when it came time to sing, the lid went up, and our lead singer came out and, had a microphone in his hand. So it was very funny, and we just had a blast. The band was very popular. We had very large crowds, and it was just a blast. So it really tuned me
Yeah.
into to doing something in pop culture that, because it was something I really didn't know a lot about.
Yeah.
I have a longtime friend that always told me, he said, you were born with a lucky horseshoe in your hand.
Is that right?
And yeah, he didn't really say it exactly that way. I can't repeat what he said, but he just said, you were born with a lucky horseshoe. And the one thing that I can tell you is I was not born with a lucky horseshoe. We had very little money.
Yeah.
The big change in my life came when I went to a high school where I met these guys in the Morticians, and we became great friends. And it changed my life. But God purposed every single big change in my life. As simple as the circumstances may have been, like to start the Morticians, the way we started that band. It seemed very simple, but I know that was a part of God's plan at that time. Even when I wasn't looking to him, even when I wasn't
Yeah.
in touch, I wasn't asking God to help me. I just knew that, I wanted to write songs, and I love, playing pop and rock music. And so, God was working then in my life. And
Yeah.
after the Morticians, I went on and did a lot of other things, but it was really the honest turning point to to the things that happened later.
Yeah, isn't that amazing how when you look back in your journey of faith and you can see the milestones of what God, you think, wow, I could see where God's hand was on me even then, and how he orchestrated all those things to come together to that point. It's really quite amazing, that when you look back on that. So I did read about this European couple, and I read something about this particular keyboard that they had engineered that you mastered. Tell us about that.
Oh, well, it was really unusual.
Uh-huh.
The husband was an inventor,
Yeah.
and this keyboard was called a chromatic keyboard.
Yeah.
We referred to it as a checkerboard because when you look at it, it's very futuristic, and it looked just like a black and white sort of a checkerboard layout.
Yeah.
And it had 3 rows of keys, and it was nothing like a piano keyboard, but they believed in it, and they really honestly wanted to see what someone like myself, from the time that you're very young, learning, you study all the same piano and keyboard books, and all the same studies that a normal keyboard player uses, but you just do it on this keyboard.
Yeah.
And so, they actually really sat there with a stick and hit my fingers if it was wrong. They would tap the keyboard.
It was one of those things, huh?
Yeah, it was, it would make a great movie, but they were very strict. And that keyboard was so unusual. I did master it. There were about 3 of us who got very good at it, and we were able to go and demonstrate it in all sorts of places.
Yeah.
And it was a keyboard that I had planned at some point to pick up and do some other things with, and I still may do that. So,
really?
but it's a very unusual keyboard. It looks great on stage. Of course, you'd have to be able to play it, but if you learn it, it's so much easier than a standard keyboard.
Is it really?
For me, it's very difficult to play a normal piano keyboard because I learned something completely different, and it makes you think. It makes you think different. Makes you think about music different. Makes you think about how to play the instrument in a completely different way.
Yeah. Well, most of the folks that know Benny Hester and his music, particularly in the Christian realm, always see you with a guitar. We don't commonly see you on a keyboard, but you are very proficient as a keyboard player, and that was your first instrument, was it not?
Only that one. Only that checkerboard.
Oh, no kidding.
Only the chromatic keyboard. I worked with such great keyboard players, Jeff Lambs and Michael Omartian and Alan Pasqua, and there are many others, but they were far beyond me, and just unless I played that keyboard, I never got comfortable with a normal keyboard.
So when you do your composing, you're doing it mostly on guitar then, because that's your.
Usually, I almost always do it, and sometimes I do it with no instrument at all.
Yeah.
Like Nobody Knows Me Like You, I had no instrument in my hand at all.
No kidding.
And in fact, I was in the Bay Area, and I was getting ready to drive to the Bay Bridge to drive back into San Francisco from Oakland, and the melody and the idea, the words and everything came into my head. And by the time I got to the other side of the bridge, I had the first verse and the chorus of Nobody Knows Me written. And I spent the rest of the day I got a guitar later and spent the day finishing it up. They don't often happen that way, but when they do, it's great.
And such a great song. Such a great song. One of your classics. Tell us about the Texas Boys Choir. What was that about?
Well, it was just very simple. The Texas Boys Choir was quite well known and very famous at the time.
Yeah.
And they went around, of course, all over Texas to have people audition and to be a part of the choir. Yeah. So they came into our school, and I'd never thought of myself as a singer. I have to think of the age. I probably was around maybe I'm going to say 11 or 12, but I never thought of myself as a singer at all. I thought of myself as more of an instrumentalist.
Yeah.
And I was beginning to think about writing, and so I wanted to do that. But I went and auditioned, scared to death,
Yeah.
made it. It was just great. It was one big performance and terrific, and something that I have to say I'm glad I did it.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was something that was, my mom particularly loved it.
Your mom loved it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Folks, if you're just joining us, we're talking to legendary Benny Hester, and we're kind of getting into his early years, and we're going to get into some more there. And time permitting, we're going to take some questions. So if you have questions for Benny, start typing them in the comments, and we'll do our best to get to them. Sometimes we don't, but because we get so entrenched in what we're doing here, but we'd love to get to some of those. And I'm sure Benny would love to hear some of those things. You paired up with a fellow by the name of Hilton in Hester and Hilton in high
I did.
school. Yeah.
Mhm.
What was that? How did that transition from the Morticians to Hester and Hilton?
Well, from high school, I with a couple of the other guys in the band, I went to Texas Tech
Yeah.
to go to college, to start college. And the first year I was there, one of the guys that I met was a virtuoso violinist, and just incredible, him and his sister. And so I was asked by him, hey, he saw the chromatic keyboard that I played. I was still playing it very frequently then. And the Morticians were still going. We were flying out, doing dates, coming back to school, and we were doing that kind of thing, opening for acts. And so the violinist asked me, his name was John Handy, and John said, hey, I played this musical, and I want to know if you would be interested in playing. And I said, sure. It's a summertime gig.
Yeah.
And the musical was called Texas.
Yeah.
And it's in the Paladuro Canyon in the panhandle of Texas, outside of Amarillo.
Yeah.
And so I said yes, I would do it. And they hired me sight unseen. They'd never heard me play.
Did they really?
Yeah, they sent me the score. I memorized it almost immediately because that's what I was used to doing.
Yeah.
And I went and played in Texas for a couple of years. I did that for 2 summers in a row. And during that time, I met Steve Hilton. And Steve was a real true vocalist. He could sing opera. And, I just call him legit, because he was really legit. I could sing, but mine was more of a pop, style.
Yeah.
And so we got together and we decided to form a duo, Hester and Hilton, and we started playing all over. And eventually we moved to El Paso, Texas, where his parents were involved with the University of Texas at El Paso there. Yeah. And we stayed with them. And eventually I started teaching a little bit of me, in a private school, teaching music. And I was asked if I wanted to go to Las Vegas to teach music there. And I'd never thought about that because I had always thought, I want to come to California. I would like to get involved in the music scene in Hollywood and all that, just like all of us, thought during that time. And so I dragged Steve with me. He kind of didn't want to go to Las Vegas, but I dragged him out there and we got a place. And not too long, well, I guess before I dragged Steve out, I took a tour through a recording studio.
Yes.
And there was only one in Las Vegas at that time. And I had it got set up by a friend. I walked in, they were showing me around the room and the control room and all that. And the house engineer was there, a guy by the name of Brent Mayer. Mm-hmm. And he was in between sessions. And he said, hey, hi, how are you? He's very friendly. Just said, what do you do? And I said, I write songs. because I'd been writing many songs for Hester and Hilton,
Yeah.
and I sang most of them, and I gave Steve a chance to sing a song or two, and so it was kind of funny, and we got to talking. I played him a song. He said, "Wow, do you have another one?" And I said, "Sure. In fact, I have a book. It's called The Good Book."
The Good Book.
And yeah, The Good Book. And I pulled the notebook out. It was called The Good Book. And the extra songs I'd written, I'd put in the Better Book. And so I had those two there, and I just played him a couple of songs, and
Yeah.
he became very interested. So we started recording, and I just started learning about recording from Brent. And that's when I dragged Steve to Las Vegas. I said, "Hey, I have some people interested in recording. I don't want to do it by myself. I would rather you be involved in it." So I had Steve come out, and we recorded we recorded a whole album, just a demo album, and we were getting ready to shop it. And Steve just said, "Well, this is not exactly for me." He wanted to be in the legit theater.
Yeah.
I'd seen him do many operas and
Yeah.
and plays and all that. So he headed back to Texas, and I was stuck there by myself. And Brent said, "Well, we're gonna do this thing, and you come on, and let's move forward." So eventually, we did, and I was offered a record deal.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, because
Yeah.
here you come out from Waco, Texas, or you were in El Paso at the time, I guess. Get invited out to Las Vegas, which is big city lights and so forth.
Yes.
You have a chance meeting with Brett Mayer, who, folks, if you don't know Brett Mayer, who is one of the most prolific, not only songwriters, but producers. I put a little partial list of people, most notably, I guess, for maybe most people there in country music. He founded the Judds, or didn't found it. He discovered the Judds.
Yes.
Discovered the Judds and wrote a number of their hits.
He did.
He worked with Elvis Presley, Duke Ellington, Chuck Berry, Sammy Davis, Gladys Knight, Willie Nelson. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And Elvis Presley, did I say Elvis Presley? I did. Roy Orbison, Merle Haggard, and Brent's still going, isn't he? He's out in
Nashville. Yep. And he's still going. And, all those people that you listed, whenever Brent and I started working together, the man who owned the studio was Elvis Presley's sound man. Yeah. His name was Bill Porter, and Bill had recorded the Everly Brothers and Roy Orbison hits and on and on. I mean, just there's a list a mile long. He's a legend. Yeah. I didn't know that at that time, but Bill sort of took me under his wing too. And, Brent was doing all those sessions of all those people that you just listed. Well, I got to be at those sessions. In fact, I was sitting in the control room when Ike and Tina cut Proud Mary.
No kidding.
They were standing 15 feet away from me. Wow. And it was just, it was terrific. I met Gladys Knight and talked to her, and the Pips, and, got to get them coffee. Liza Minnelli, and so many people that, for a guy from Waco, Texas, who had no opportunity at all, I had no chance whatsoever for my life to change from, the way that I had grown up, and, it was so restrictive. And to see that happen, it really did mean a lot to me. So, and Bill Porter also he took me to Elvis's concerts, and I sat at the mixing console with him every night, and he would mix the show. And I would just sit there and talk with him, and he, it was just terrific. I learned so much.
So here you are, right in the inside of pop music, the top, to coin a phrase, top of the pop music industry at the time, with Elvis Presley, Ike and Tina Turner, Gladys Knight, Orbison, all these people that Brent, and you've maintained a lifelong friendship with Brent, haven't you?
I sure have. Yeah, Brent and I have been friends for a long, long time, since that very first day we met. And, in Las Vegas, we did a lot of business things. A lot of these things overlap. Like, I was always looking to do an album write new songs, record them, and get them out.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, sometimes you have to support yourself. And we were in the studio one day, and there were two brothers that owned some radio stations in Las Vegas and in Phoenix.
Yeah.
The Phelan brothers, and it was KLUC radio and KENO. I believe both those radio stations are still active in Las Vegas, but they were the two hottest stations in town. And the guys came down one time, and they were listening to some of the music I was cutting and Brent and I were working on, and they said, "Hey, would you guys like to do a station identification package for us? Because we love this sound. How can we get this for our radio station?" And we said, "We'll do it." And so we cut an ID package for them. And then they started having clients that heard those, and they wanted a song done for their business. So it caught on like wildfire. And pretty soon, almost every single thing on radio and television, our company was called Musad. And it was, we called them commercial songs, not jingles. Yeah. And we started in about 1970, and it probably went to about 1980. We had no competition whatsoever. We did almost every bank, hotel. We did the Review Journal. In fact, the line, the RJ is Las Vegas, is still up on billboards and all that. I wrote that. Yeah. And, we did for Jerry Tarkanian at UNLV. UNLV was kind of new at the time, and Jerry had the Running Rebels, and they were on a winning streak like crazy, but they didn't have a school song, and they didn't have a fight song.
Okay.
And he asked us if we would write them. And so we did. Yeah, and he took us into the locker room, introduced us to all the basketball players and just everything. And I sat there with the guitar, and we played it to the team, just sitting there. Amazing. And they just went, "Hey, this is fabulous." So, it was a lot of interesting things happened to us. I met Baron Hilton. Baron Hilton was just like you would think of out of a movie, with a big cigar, sitting at the end of a 45-foot table, with about 14 or 15 of his aides, and me playing a guitar. And it was a lot of fun. I learned a lot from all those experiences.
That's crazy. What an immerse you just got immersed into the industry, didn't you, at that time?
I did.
See, that's a little later. That photo, I think, is a little later with your Nickelodeon. We'll get into that a little bit later. But
okay.
That is also Nickelodeon. So maybe we throw some photos up of some of the earlier ones. But there's your. See, that's the band I remember.
That's my Las Vegas band.
Yeah, your Las Vegas band. And I remember the first time I saw you, Benny, was at Calvary Chapel of Downey. And that was the band that played with you. You got Jeff Lambs there. You got John Parenti. I can't remember the other fellas' names there, but
Dan Flannery and Ed Arnold.
Yeah. And I just remember, wow, these guys are tight. This is a great band with great music. There's an early one.
That's a Mortician's picture.
Is that a Mortician's?
Me in the middle, our drummer on my right, and Joe Hall, the tall one there, is the lead guitar player.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, there. Let's see. You're over on the left there. Is that you on the left?
That's me holding my coat.
Okay. Yeah.
We were pretty sharp dressers, I guess, at that time. Yeah.
It looks good. That's great. I love the era. That's great. So now you're out in Las Vegas, and Brent suggests that you record an album using Elvis's band, the TCB band.
He did.
This is prior to your Christian experience, is it not? Or was it for the Christian?
No. Well, I'll tell you what had happened in the early 70s. I started just reading the Bible on my own. I wasn't prompted to. Yeah. I had been exposed to primarily the Baptist church that we went to for summer camp in Texas, but it didn't really take. I was just kind of going there because everyone did, and it was interesting, a lot of fun. Sure. But but I started reading the Bible, and some of that started creeping into my songs. I listened to Cat Stevens,
Yeah.
and his song had some spiritual elements.
Yeah, they
And
did.
Seals, yeah, they weren't Christian, but
Yeah.
I noticed that it was about something a little bit different, a little bit more. Seals and Crofts did the same thing.
Yeah.
They were very popular at the time, but
Yeah.
there were others, and I wanted to write music that said something higher,
Yeah.
said something more. And so I started writing a little bit of that
Yeah.
into my songs. And Brent had cut a date with Sammy Davis Jr. He had just cut Candyman, which
Yeah.
was a big hit for him.
Yeah.
And when people were working the shows in Las Vegas, if they were working on an album, they came there to work on it or continue working
Sure.
on it,
Yeah.
while they're doing their
Yep.
shows in Vegas. But it was, he asked me if I would like to work with them. It was Bill Porter and Brent. And I think Brent talked to the band that day, and Bill said, "Yeah, that's a great idea." And also, Bill was starting a company at the same time, called Vegas Music
Yeah.
International, which was a record label and a studio and all of that put together. And they said, would you like to be one? They had some artists, Bobby Darin was working with them,
Yeah.
and a whole bunch
Yeah.
of other people, that very different, very eclectic bunch of artists. But he asked me if I wanted to do an album, and I said, of course, because I'd been watching Elvis's band
Yeah.
play when I would go to the International Hotel and watch them do their concerts. So, and I knew that Ron Tutt, who later
Yeah.
cut albums with me, and he
Yes.
traveled with me for 5 years. He was in my band.
Yeah.
He was Elvis's drummer.
Legendary.
He had cut Cat Stevens' Peace Train and a bunch
Yeah.
of other hits that I loved. Jerry Sheff had just finished the last Doors album with the Doors. James Burton,
James Burton. Yeah. Legendary.
Hall of
James
Fame,
Burton.
yeah,
Yeah.
Hall of Fame rock and roll guitar player
Yeah.
and fantastic player. And let's see, Glenn Harden, keyboard player.
Yeah.
And we also brought Larry Mahobrak in, who had played with Elvis prior
Yeah.
to the guys that were there. And we also brought in Joe Osborne, who was a bass player that cut California Dreaming and Bridge
Yeah.
Over Troubled Water and many, many songs. A great guy. And I miss Joe. He's a fantastic player.
So you
So,
go ahead.
so that was so it was a start. When they wanted me to do the album, of course, the only answer is yes. Of course, I want to do that. And when do we start?
Yeah.
So
Now, were you a little bit intimidated at that point, or did you feel pretty confident you had your feet under you at that point, or?
Well, I wasn't intimidated. I probably didn't know enough to be intimidated. I felt very comfortable. I thought that these guys, I had watched them, heard them, listened to them. I felt like I knew them.
So you knew them. So that took a little bit of that stigma away, I guess, right?
It did. But I had never really, when I was with Bill, I never went backstage, or we never encroached on their territory or anything like that. I didn't. And but when I was introduced to them, I was very comfortable, and they knew that I was familiar with them and what they had done, their careers.
Yeah.
But it was a lot. I have to say, they locked in and they listened to what your song was, and they had a great take on what I was doing at the time.
So they added a lot to it, and it's almost like the wrecking crew, right? I mean, they just come in and make the thing that's incredible.
The way we did it then, now a lot is computerized and samples and so on and so forth. Sure. But we sat in a room, we could all see each other, and we would just talk, and so they would say, "Okay, play us one. Let's hear." So I would just play the song, and then I would say maybe what's important, this line, this
Yeah.
guitar line is kind of important. I was thinking, maybe the bass would do this here. If it was right, they would try it.
Yeah.
And if it worked out, it was great. They always came up with something better. So, my
Yeah.
my ideas were okay, but
Sure.
theirs were great.
Yeah.
And so, it was just a building in a very creative environment. Like they were
Yeah.
always just giving you input and saying, "Hey, what do you think about this?" And they would
Yeah.
just try things. So in the arrangement part of the song, they really played a big part. And I would have to say Ronnie, particularly Ron Tutt.
Ronnie Tutt. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Ronnie
And
Tutt's
and
gone on to be with the Lord, hasn't he? Or is he still?
yeah, yeah, he passed away just a couple of months ago,
Yeah. Yeah. I remember that.
and that was a big shock, and I'm really saddened by it.
Yeah. Yeah. He was a powerhouse.
Yeah.
I'll ask a question because I'm sure everybody wants to. Did you get to know Elvis at all?
No, I never met Elvis
Really?
personally.
Wow.
No, because we were in the back of the house,
Yeah.
and
Sure.
so and it was a
Yeah.
permanent stage, a permanent home
Right.
for him there,
Yeah.
and so he would do his show, and when they were done, he was really out of there before the band ever stopped playing.
Yeah. Yeah.
He never stuck around.
So
And
the
if
phrase Elvis has left the building
Yeah, he
is
really
true,
had
right?
left it. By the time that Ronnie got to the drum thing, that I
Yeah.
call it the Elvis has left the building
Yeah.
drum solo,
Uh-huh.
yeah, Elvis actually had gone. And, he interacted with the audience a lot, though. It
Yeah.
was just primarily during his concert. He
Yeah.
would sometimes come into the crowd and he would shake hands with people and, talk,
Yeah.
say hi to them. And I was very surprised, but he was
Yeah.
very friendly, and his audiences loved him, of course.
Yeah. Well, I want to drill into your journey of faith a little bit, but I want to follow up on this element because the album that you recorded with Elvis's band ended up getting the masters ended up getting burned in a warehouse fire. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah, it was. Well, we recorded the album.
Yeah.
The LPs were pressed.
Yeah.
The single was pressed and ready to go. There was a big warehouse attached to the record company, and it was in an industrial, part of Las Vegas.
Yeah.
And the studio was also attached. They just built the whole thing on out.
Mhm.
And they called me one morning around 4 a.m. and said the studio is on fire. My record had not come out yet. The
Oh my gosh.
publicity, there had been promos sent to radio stations. Some of them were already spinning them on their shows and,
Yeah.
talking about the new album. Billboard magazine did a piece on
Yeah.
my album and about what was happening in Las Vegas and, how this was going to be a first for Las Vegas.
Yeah.
And so that all, was just going great, but I was devastated. The place
I'll
was
bet.
burning. You could see it from across Las Vegas,
Yeah.
and everything burned to the ground. My masters, all the vinyl. There were some vinyl that made it. There were some looters that were
Mhm.
taking, some of the records and so forth. But a real devastating blow for a young guy who's,
No kidding.
first effort. We spent a lot of time on it. Players that'll probably never get back together again.
Yeah.
I thought that was the end of that. And I didn't know what I was going to do with my life at that point.
Wow.
I don't
Wow.
think any of us did. Brent
Yeah.
didn't. Brent eventually moved to Nashville,
Yeah.
and I moved from Las Vegas eventually to the LA area.
Mhm.
And so, but we were all devastated, and I was reeling, and it took me a while to just believe that it was true,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it was. Yeah.
You were able to recover some of that, weren't you? A
I
few years
did.
back.
And
Yeah.
yeah, what we did was we took the vinyl, some of the very pristine vinyl.
Yeah.
There are people now who are very good at bringing vinyl back to a very a great sounding digitized master. And we
Yeah.
did that with the album and brought it back to its original sound and its original condition. And we released it. That was in 2016.
Yes.
And it was just terrific. You know, the
Yeah.
first single on that album was going to be a song called We All Know He's Coming.
Yeah.
And, you know, Billboard magazine, which was the hot magazine for music at that time, you know, was talking about We All Know He's Coming being the single. And,
Yeah.
you know, I was beginning to get crowds and so forth around the country as I would go play. And it was a bittersweet time.
Yeah, and We All Know He's Coming, the song, Benny, I recall because I was in the audience at the Anaheim Convention Center. And I think it had to be probably the late 70s, maybe early 80s. And I thought it was one of the most powerful songs because I don't know, maybe it was all, well, first of all, it's just a great song. And but the song is very powerful, and in front of that crowd, it really left an impact on me. And folks, if you get a chance, look it up on YouTube. It's I think it's on there somewhere. But I think Tom Stipe came out and introduced you guys.
That's right. Sounds right.
Yeah, and I think you had the guitar player at the time was John Wickham. I think you had playing with you. Right? Yeah.
John Wickham, Ronnie Tutt from Elvis's band. That was when Ronnie. That was in 1979. Ronnie had just started touring with me that year, and went on until about 84, 85. And you know, it was a tight band. We were deadly serious about what we were doing. It was a song that I wrote out of an earnest, honest search. I had heard Christians talking about that event, that Christ would return, and I didn't know a lot about it. And I was reading my Bible, and those thoughts just made their way into that song. And very biblical. It's very biblical based, you know.
So you actually wrote that before you kind of made a full commitment of faith.
I was I would say I was in search mode because it was 1973, the very next year, that I was invited to a big evangelistic meeting in a gigantic tent on a vacant lot in Las Vegas. There was a group that had come into town. They were all over the strip. They were handing people tracts through their windows, and they had been there for a pretty long time. And it was something that I would never go to. I couldn't believe I was actually walking up to this tent, and I'd never done anything like that. And there was a band playing. They were hippies, you know, and the music was very relatable. I could get into it. And so I sat, and after they played music, there was a message. There was a couple of thousand people there. And when the invitation was given at the end of the night, I was one of the many people that went forward, and it changed my life. I got to know the people. I met Skeeter Davis. I don't know if you remember her or not, but
she's a country artist.
Sort of a country artist. Met her there. I sang.
She was married to. Who was she married to? She was married to one of the. Wasn't she married to George Jones or one of the? I can't. Maybe I'm thinking of somebody there, but.
She had a song called "The End of the World."
Which don't they know it's the end of the world? Yeah,
that's it. Yeah,
that's okay.
And and I got to hear her sing that, you know, face to face, and we sang a couple of duets together at this tent because they had me come back and play, you know, occasionally during the time they were there. I think they were in the town in Las Vegas maybe for about a year.
Yeah.
And then they move on to other places, you know, and it really meant a lot to me. And that song, "We All Know He's Coming," was when I first started seeing those people, those Christians on the street. They were witnessing to people. They were talking to people. They were courteous. You know, they weren't pushy. I like that. I like the fact that they were if people wanted to talk, they would. If they didn't
Yeah.
want to, they wouldn't. But
Yeah.
they usually gave them something to read if they, would read it at a later time.
Yeah.
And that's what I did. I just stuck it in my pocket and read it at some other time.
That's crazy. So you have this foundation of Bible teaching from your upbringing. You go through the searching element, and then through this evangelistic outreach, you make a full commitment to Christ.
Hmm.
Uh, so what happened at that point? Because here you are moving in a direction of just having this incredible career as a recording artist in the secular realm, if you will, and then you come to faith. I mean, some people would say that's career suicide, but yet
Hmm.
you made the choice to record decidedly Christian uh, albums. How did that transition take place?
Well, I was baptized right at that tent. They had
Yeah,
a day when lots of people got baptized. And on that particular day, I was really touched in a really unusual way. I just kind of wandered off back behind the tent. And I really did feel, a calling on my life. I didn't know really what that meant at the time. And I couldn't tell you, I couldn't tell you all the emotions that I had, but I just felt like this was a new start.
yeah,
And yes, my album burned up. There was no way to recover albums
yeah.
in those days.
Right.
There was no you were really done.
Yeah,
If your master was destroyed, you didn't, nothing else could happen.
yeah,
But I started just writing tunes, and there was a gap. 73. The studio burned down at the end of 72. 73, I became a Christian, and I started writing about that experience.
yeah,
Jesus came into my life, just totally simple as you can possibly
yeah,
get,
yeah.
nothing complicated. And I'd already had, We All Know He's Coming. I
Mhm.
had a couple of other songs on that album that had
Be a receiver. Uh,
spiritual threads. I
yeah,
had Be a Receiver, right?
yeah,
But those songs I was writing, and I put together that Las Vegas band that you saw, that you put the
yeah,
picture up.
yeah,
I started, I met John Parenti at our church. I got into a great church in Henderson, which is just outside of Las
yeah,
Vegas,
yeah,
and it was called the Neighborhood Church. And I went there for all those years, and I um, was a worship leader. Nobody called them worship leaders at that time. We just led songs,
yeah,
and if I had a new one that I'd written, I would play it.
yeah,
And I was mainly about being an artist,
yeah,
but at that particular time, somebody needed to lead
yeah,
all these people that were in this church, and so I did that. But I
yeah,
met John Parenti there one day. He forgot his Bible, and I was sitting on stage playing a song, and he came up and to pick up his Bible, and he heard me playing, and he went, "Wow, I play drums." And so John and I struck up a conversation and started, putting this band together. He knew some guys from high school, and so I kind of got to meet them. And I met Jeff Lambs. Don't know if I should tell this story or not, but he worked for his dad, and his dad was in the meat business there. And on the day I met him, Jeff had just cut two of his fingers off, and he was a keyboard player.
oh my gosh.
And he had them all bandaged up, all bloody, been to the hospital, blah, blah, blah. And I saw him. We were standing at his piano at his house. And he said, "Well, I'm not ever going to be able to play again." And he was trying to play his keyboard with his, fingers bandaged. And I said, "Yeah, Jeff, not only are you going to play, you're going to play a concert with me this week."
Wow.
He started laughing. And yeah, you went, "Yeah, sure." I said, "You are." And so we went ahead, had rehearsals. And very quickly after that accident, Jeff went on and played, one of the finest keyboard players that I've ever
Yes,
heard.
yes.
And just great guy and terrific person. And, just he played. No person would ever know he had ever had an accident or that.
Did they sew
And
the fingers back on so he
no,
regained his? So he
no,
actually adapted to with two less
yes,
fingers.
uh-huh.
Amazing.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
I'm gonna say from the first knuckle, down, but
That's
but that
amazing.
it was amazing, and I personally just never thought about it.
Yeah.
It never even entered my head. I I expected Jeff to do the most beautiful, complicated or whatever it took to make that song happen. He could
Yeah.
do it,
Yeah.
So he was terrific. So
Yeah.
I
And of
started
course,
writing. Yeah, go ahead.
well, I was going to say, well, because Jeff is still out there. I know he tours with Tommy Coombs' band
Uh-huh.
and plays with Franklin Graham all over the world. Great
Hmm.
keyboard player. But
Hmm.
go ahead.
Well, I wrote songs that were about my experience and about my life changing, and I just wanted to get those things down in music. So there was that period from 73 when I actually committed my life to Christ, uh, and 78 whenever Billy Ray Hearn offered me a record deal. And I said, I had cut some demos, took a couple of them, drove from Las Vegas to Canoga Park, which is where Billy Ray's Sparrow Records was.
Hmm.
And I didn't have an appointment. I just sat out in the lobby area and waited until I could see him. And he was kind enough to actually do that, as stupid as it was. But I sat there for a while, and I went in and I played him a couple of the songs, and he actually listened to them.
Yeah.
And he gave me a record deal right on the spot.
No kidding.
And yeah, and he said, who would you think could produce this album? And I said, Brent Mayer. And so he said,
Did
okay,
he know
great.
Brent at the time?
He did.
Billy Ray?
He had other times that he had come in contact with
Yeah.
Brent, and so he said, well, we have some studio musicians in mind, and blah blah blah. And I had worked with a lot of great studio musicians during our time with Musad.
Yeah.
Lee Greenwood sang some
Sure.
of our
Yeah.
commercials for us, and
Yeah.
Brent had moved to Nashville, so I was commuting from Las Vegas to Nashville every single month,
Yeah.
and we would cut a bunch of commercials, and then I would take them back to Las Vegas and present them to the client, and and do it that way.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to use studio players because I had spent so much time with my Las Vegas band that there was a sound created, a sound that I liked.
Yeah.
And it was different than just having guys come in and play on your record.
Yeah.
So I said, Billy, I would really like to just use my band. And he went, okay, we've had some experience of that before. Nobody was really for it. I talked Brent into it. I talked Billy Ray into it. And before you know it, we were all in vans and cars driving to Nashville in the middle of the winter to record an album with my Las Vegas band.
Yeah.
And it was really terrific. Now, the band, and I've never actually even said this anywhere before tonight, but we actually had studio musicians hired on standby.
Did you?
In case the band couldn't really pull it off, because they had never recorded an album before. Never been in the studio in that way before. And so it was just sort of chancy. I think Billy Ray thought he was taking a chance. And I think Brent, Brent wasn't familiar with the band, and he heard the band for the first time when we got to Nashville and when we sat up and played in the studio. But, so it was a really great experience. And that was the right choice to use that band because they had played so many concerts with me. They knew these songs and they really had their own take on it. And they were, they were really primed for this.
So they pulled it off.
They did pull it off. And they never knew that there were people waiting in the wings in case something went disastrous.
If they're watching tonight, they know now. So.
They know tonight for the very first time.
Folks,
Uh,
if you're tuning in, and well, I mean, if you're with us, thanks for staying with us. We're going a little bit long because we got a little more of a journey to cover here, because Benny has a whole nother career that came after his music. And gosh, I hate glossing over it, because Benny, you had, When God Ran. We talked about the early part, when, what a
mhm.
mega hit that was, a charting hit, which still holds records today. Your rendition of Christ the Solid Rock. Oh my gosh, just countless songs that you've done, and great songs. But now you kind of faded off the scene, I guess. I would say, is that an accurate, the music scene, I guess, or the Christian music scene,
Mhm.
and then you became involved in television.
Well, I met Rita, my wife,
Yes,
in 1988,
lovely. Yes.
and she had a fantastic career. She had the largest kids touring company in America. She had worked in New York for the Broadway producers, Barry and Fran Weisler,
Uh-huh.
and she had been the manager on, several of Broadway shows. She knew that business inside out.
Yeah.
And so when we first met, she started telling me about a lot of the things that she wanted to do with her life. And she wanted to get a show on TV that was for kids, that was like nothing that anyone had ever seen before.
Yeah.
And I thought it was very interesting. I'd never done anything like that. And in 1991, I had released my last album around 91. The CCM and Christian music scene was changing. It was becoming
Yeah.
more worship oriented.
Yes.
I had certainly done a lot of worship, but I was really a songwriter
Yeah.
and singer. I wrote songs, and then then I sing them. And so, I really wasn't into making that complete switch. And
Yeah.
I know a lot of people did that so successfully.
Yeah.
And like, all the groups that we know, some that you've mentioned. And so, um, uh, I I really wanted to do something new. And Rita and I developed a show called Roundhouse.
Yeah.
She was the real co-creator of it, and another person who had a show that was our partner, uh, who did In Living Color, which was a big hit on
Yeah.
the Fox network.
Sure.
And so uh, we needed to have a comedy writer who was really great. And so we developed the show, and we got married in 91. And just about the time we got married, we had Fox pick up our television show, but it got bumped out when some executives changed,
Yeah.
changed up. And
Sure.
so it eventually went to Nickelodeon. And we were called back to LA. We didn't even get to take a honeymoon. We
Oh
were
my
called
gosh.
back to LA. They came and picked us up in the MGM Grand Plane, which was really quite the
No
treatment.
kidding.
Yeah,
Wow.
and if you've ever seen that, or if you see it online, it's a very interesting
Yeah.
plane. I think they were owned by MTV at the time, and of course
Mhm.
Viacom. And
Yeah.
I think they just had deals. It was probably going back home, and we
Yeah.
flew to New York. Just four of us, one of the Nickelodeon executives, and the three producers of the show.
Yeah.
And we flew to New York, and then to Florida at the Nickelodeon studios at Universal to take a
Yeah.
look at them, and then back home. And so that started off a whole new era of my life,
Yeah.
because we did the pilot, and then in 92 the show was picked up for series, and by the summer of 92 we were shooting the series, and it was on the air, and it
Yeah.
became it was Nickelodeon's golden age.
Yeah. Yeah.
There were four shows that were picked,
Mhm.
and Roundhouse, our show, was one of them,
Yeah.
that did the very first prime time for kids on
Yeah.
television. And it had great viewership. That's
Yeah.
our first cast
Yeah.
that's there at Nickelodeon in Orlando.
Yeah.
But you know, we did that show. We had about 6 million viewers every week
That's
for
incredible.
four seasons, 4 years, 52 episodes.
Yeah.
And we won all kinds of awards. I won the best original song on television with a
Yeah.
song called "I Can Dream," which
Yeah.
I think you had a picture of us collecting our
Yes.
award there
Yeah.
with my co-writer,
Right.
Buddy. And
Yeah.
we were nominated for 6 best songs
Yeah.
over those 4 years. And the really important thing is that we were nominated 3 times for best variety series or special on television. You know, out of those 5 slots, we were one of them for 3 of those 4 years in a row. And so, you know, it was a pretty interesting time for us. It was,
Yeah.
we learned a lot, and it was a high-powered time.
And it had good moral. But and by the way, Marisa, bring that photo back up of the cast there. That cast of the show there. Now, if I'm not mistaken, on the bottom left of your screen, redhead is a young Crystal Lewis, or
Yeah,
is
it's Crystal.
that's
Crystal Lewis.
Crystal Lewis, where she started out there.
Yeah, you know, she was on. I did a couple of records on a label called Frontline, and Crystal was on that label, and we were doing a record showcase and playing some of our songs. I was playing mine, and Crystal was playing some of her new songs. And my wife just walked up to her and said, "This, you know, she told me, Benny, this girl's fantastic. She'd be perfect for this." She went up and asked Crystal if she'd be interested in being on a television series, and she said, "Sure, I would try that." And so we brought her on, and of course she became very popular. And,
yes.
in fact, sang quite a few of the songs that I got nominated for Best Song for.
Yeah, did she? Incredible. So Roundhouse went on for was it 8 years that you did it?
No, we did it for 4.
For 4 years. Yeah.
4.
And you guys won all these awards and incredible. So Benny, you've had quite a diverse career, and I'm most impressed with that you've adapted and just embraced every one of those changes in your career, and that you're a man of faith. You also became very good friends with Pastor Chuck Smith, didn't you?
I did. Yeah. Chuck was my pastor.
Yeah.
You know, for 30 years, and you know, I traveled with him.
Yeah.
I opened up for his speaking engagements all over the country and in Canada, wherever he went. And it was a terrific time. He had 2 favorite songs. Christ the Solid Rock was his very favorite.
Oh,
and Nobody Knows Me Like You.
Yeah.
He would always say, do those, but do anything else you want. And so, you know, I would play other songs, but I would always do those. So he was responsible for just changing my life in some terrific ways. Best Bible teacher I've ever been around.
Absolutely, hands down. Yes.
Yeah.
It's where I cut my teeth under Chuck's teaching as well.
Yeah, right.
Benny, well, Marisa, do we have time for a couple of quick questions? Do we have any questions there? Maybe bring 1 or 2 up, because we're going to close out here. We're running a little bit late, but I'd love to give the folks a chance to maybe a couple of questions. And it looks like we got a lot of comments, but there's DJ Randy Johnson. What is the name of the Lost album?
Well, I think the Lost album, he's probably referring to the first album I did with the TCV band in Las Vegas. That I call it my 72 album. Or sometimes I call it the Two Birds album, because it had a song on it that had a line in it. But, you know, that's probably the one. It's not lost anymore. Well,
good. And it's a good question, Randy, because I see you have a follow-up question, is where you can get your hands on it. Where can folks get their hands on your music, Benny?
You can buy that one on iTunes.
On iTunes. Yeah. Okay. So go to iTunes and find it.
Yeah. There's a link on my Facebook too. You can hit the link and it'll take you to that album.
Yeah. Anything in the works, Benny, that you guys are working on and that we might look out for in the future?
Well, we are developing some shows for television. The landscape, as everybody knows, has changed
Yeah,
drastically
sure.
in the years that have passed. And for me, one of the things that motivated me to write Christian music in the first place was I wanted to write songs that would appeal to people who wouldn't necessarily come to a church.
Yeah.
I wanted those people, like the very first thing I did with my Las Vegas band is Mario Murillo invited me to come to the Bay Area and stay for weeks at a stretch. He did this on a couple of occasions. We stayed right at Berkeley. There was all kinds of things going on and unrest that were happening. And we were playing concerts in the Golden Gate Park, in Union Square. We were the first rock band to ever set up and play with a huge sound system with the help of the police department and play
Yeah.
there. We had thousands of people. We got a chance to do things that were exciting to me. So today, the only thing I can equate with that I do now is that I license my songs on television shows. I've had shows on
Hmm.
HBO and FX and
Yeah.
Hulu and all kinds of places. Besides our Nickelodeon show,
Yeah.
our Nick show, Roundhouse, was on MTV. Also, it was on BET. It was on all kinds of other channels.
Yeah.
And we hope to get it up on Paramount before long, Paramount Plus, because Paramount's the owner. But I like the fact that that is a true way of evangelism. It gives me the same
Yes.
feeling. Like if I have a song that has a spiritual thread in it or a Christian theme, and I see it played in a show where you normally wouldn't see one of those,
Yeah.
I feel like I'm maybe reaching out to somebody who would normally, they wouldn't hear that song
Yeah.
because they're not going to come to a church event. They're not going to come where I play. They're not going to probably ever tune in to a Christian station,
Yeah.
So I like it, and that's what I'm doing now. I mean, I just like the fact that you can have your music out there in a lot of different ways.
Yes, indeed, indeed. And you're right. You write in such a way that conveys the message very clearly, but it doesn't smack you over the head. I mean, it does in a spiritual sense, but it's
Mhm.
not in your face kind of. I don't know how you explain it. I think you
I
had.
call it dropping the anvil. It's like
I like that,
it's
dropping the
like
anvil.
yeah,
Yeah.
every song doesn't have to be that.
Yes, and another person I think that writes like this, Chuck Girard has a lot of songs like that
Chuck.
that are they're very distinct message in it, but it drops the anvil. Yeah, it does, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
very good.
yeah.
Benny, in our closing minutes here, because we've got a lot of folks that watch us, and then a lot of folks that watch this after the fact in when it's in archived, because that's where we
Mhm,
get probably a good number of our views. But
mhm.
you're a man of faith. You've seen God's providence on your life all this time. What would you say to those that are watching tonight, or maybe watching in the archives, if they're struggling in their life in terms of they don't have a faith, or they're just kind of floundering? What would you say to them?
Well, I might say something like where I started. I really wasn't born with a lucky horseshoe in
Yeah,
my hand,
yeah,
and I wasn't. Everything was a struggle, and there were moments where I saw God at work in my life. And I would say you probably, if you look for those moments, every person struggles.
yes,
And to that person, it is very important. It is very serious.
yeah,
It hurts a lot. And I've had many of those times. In fact, those things show up in my music. And, that's the way that I speak the best. But I would just say, turn to God. Same thing I tell my kids. Let God help you with the answer that you're looking for. Don't try to figure it out yourself, and don't be a loner.
yeah,
Reach out to him.
right. And he's there, folks. And those that are watching, the scripture tells us, and Jesus said himself, "Behold, I stand at the door and I knock. Any man who hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and sup with him and he with me. And that's God's promise. Jesus will do that.
Yeah.
And that's the door of your heart. And if you're in that place tonight, reach out to him. Say a simple prayer of confession. Lord, I confess I'm a sinner. Come into my life, change me. As Benny's song says, Jesus came into my life, which is a reality in the life of a believer, and give your whole life to him. But what I'd like you to do, if you do pray that prayer, let us know at prayer@theupperroompresents.com. That's prayer@theupperroompresents.com. Because we'd love to connect with you. We'd love to send you a little Bible if you don't have one, and give you some material to help you kind of get founded in your faith. And that's what we're about here. So we pray that if those that are out there that are at that point, a precipice, make that step, because it's a life of faith is a journey, and God is good on his promise that he's come to give you life, and he's come to give you life abundantly. Benny, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being with us. I've been, as I've said, I've been looking forward to this because I just so enjoy you. I enjoy being with you. I enjoy your music. I love your wife, Rita. You guys are just great people, and this has been a blessing for me.
Well, thank you so much, Ron. It's been fun, and it's kind of like old time. I don't feel like we've been apart. Just
exactly.
Every time we get together, we pick it up right where we left off.
Yep, indeed. And folks, thanks for going with us a little bit late. I've been watching the numbers, and it looks like you've stayed with us. So thank you. I know we've gone a little bit longer than we should tonight, but it's been a great story. Benny, thanks again. Folks, thanks for watching. We'll see you next week on Real Talk. God bless you.